Quest of the Warrior Maiden by Linda C. McCabe. Chapter 7. Namphase was confused by the ecstatic vision he had that morning. He rarely had visions, but when he did, they consumed his mind and body for days. As he lay on the bottom of his cave with his arms wrapped around his legs, he could barely hear the sounds of the forest. There was the familiar sound of songbirds, but in the distance, he could hear a new sound approaching him. It was a rhythmic sound, like a heartbeat or hoofbeats. The sound ended as a horse clopped to a halt at the opening of his small cave. "What is this? I live in this forsaken place as a refuge from the sins of the world. What, dear Lord, does this intrusion portend?" Namphase had not spoken aloud for several years, having taken a vow of silence. He had lived in the woods longer than that, with no real idea of how long it had been. In less than a month of living in the wild, he had lost track of time. He knew the seasons and had a vague idea of the months, but did not know the specific day. Every day was a day of devotion for him, but he set aside one day a week as a day of rest. He refrained from gathering wood, water, food, or anything to assist his austere existence, because that was the day he dedicated for prayer and fasting. To help him remember, Namphase had collected 7 rocks and rotated them each morning. When the single white rock was placed in the carved-out shelf, he treated that day as his Sunday, regardless of how it actually fell on the calendar. He crawled out of his small hand-dug cave and saw an unconscious soldier slumped forward with arms around the horse's neck. "A wounded soldier? Why must you tempt me, Lord, by sending a sinner my way?" He untangled the reins from around the soldier's arms and worked to lift him off the horse's back. Namphase laid the young man gently on the ground and removed the helmet, revealing a blood-stained cloth wound loosely around the warrior's head. Retrieving a few roughly hewn bowls, Namphase went off in search of fresh water and herbs. Kneeling in front of a spring, he stared at the blue-green water. A torrent of images rippled across the still pond, erasing the reflection of fallen trees and replacing it with a portrait of death. Memories of his own time on the battlefield assaulted his senses. The scent of pine and moss was replaced. The smell of blood, urine, and excrement. Cries of agony rang in his ears from soldiers as they were stabbed and slashed, along with the mournful sound of death rattles. He wept while gathering the herb dittany. Years of isolation and deprivation did not allow Namphase to forget the horrors of war. He was uncertain if the wounded soldier was Christian or Saracen. The armor was plain and indistinguishable. The saddle and the tapestry covering the horse's back appeared to belong to a Saracen, but many horses were claimed as spoils of war, so those indicators were no guarantee of the rider's allegiance. This man did not stumble upon Namphase. This man was brought to him for a reason. It was either the work of God and his angels, or that of the devil and his minions. Namphase returned to the wounded man and carefully unwound the banner to find long hair matted with clots of blood. Shaking his head, he grabbed a dull knife from his belt and began hacking the hair to better address the wound. Why does this man have such long hair? Was he a member or follower of the deposed Merovingian dynasty? Had he challenged the Carolingians for the throne? Or did this soldier consider himself to be a latter-day Samson whose strength was held in unshorn locks? Either way, it is a shame for someone so young to be engaged in war. He tore the banner into strips. Wetting a piece of fabric in the fresh spring water, he did his best to clean the wound. The water in the bowl soon turned a deep scarlet with flecks of black. Using rocks to crush the dittany, he collected the precious liquid expressed from the herb in another bowl. He finished by applying a poultice of dittany to the wound to stanch the flow of blood, and wrapped a piece of cloth around the soldier's head. Namphase propped the youth up against a boulder and lifted a fresh cup of water to the soldier's lips. As the water entered his mouth, the young man sputtered and regained consciousness. Where am I? In the wood, Namphase croaked. He tried clearing his throat. His years of silence left it exceedingly hoarse. The Lord brought you to me. The warrior reflexively felt the back of his head and moaned. I changed your dressing and cut your hair, Namphase said. Tell me, child, whom do you serve? Charlemagne is my sovereign. Namphase closed his eyes and sighed. Christian. A Christian soldier. Charlemagne, repeated Namphase, his mind going elsewhere. King Charles, the Great. He had once served in Charlemagne's army. Namphase had loved his king, but it was the love of one of the king's daughters that drove him from the royal court. King Charles would never have consented to any of his daughters marrying someone of Namphase's meager stature. After only one incident, he realized he had to leave to save his immortal soul from temptation. Monastery life had given him the needed reprieve. Construction on the abbey near the Gouffre de Lantouy in the Lot River Valley kept him busy from dawn to dusk with no time to think of his past sins. However, once construction was complete, he found that life in a monastery did not provide the solitude and deprivation he needed. He set out again in search of a place where he could be with God and devoid of human companionship. The forest had been his sanctuary until the intrusion of a wounded man brought back memories of his prior life to haunt him. Namphase rummaged around in his small cave, retrieving roots, pine nuts, and dried berries, and offered them to the soldier. The youth gratefully accepted the food, eating in silence. This suited Namphase, for he did not want to know what was happening in the outside world. He wanted only to demonstrate penitence and beg God's forgiveness for his sins of lust and violence. Thank you for your kindness. The young man stood and winced in pain. Do you have another wound? I was kicked in my side last night, the soldier said through gritted teeth. I do not know if anything is broken or just bruised. Let me have a look, said Namphase, as he helped remove the armor. He lifted the thick padding and saw not the tight abdominal muscles of a male, but the soft belly and gentle curves of a young woman. The armor had been heavy enough to flatten her breasts, but once it was off, it was apparent his patient was not a young man. His hands trembled as he examined her. There was extensive bruising, but the skin remained intact. He felt her ribcage, trying to avoid touching the curve of her breast. Namphase closed his eyes and remembered a stolen embrace long ago, where he had groped the bare skin of a princess in a fit of passion. Once again, he was overcome with shame. No bones are broken, he said through tears of despair, and turned his back on her. Who brought you here? Are you a demon? Sent to tempt me? I am not a demon. I'm a follower of Christ and a soldier for Charlemagne. I do not know how I came here, but I am thankful for your help. You must leave, for I cannot trust you. I have had many visions sent to torture me. Just this morning, I saw a ship with lost souls on board flying through the air. The devil laughed at me and said the valiant Ruggiero was with him and had almost turned to Christ, but was now beyond reach. Ruggiero is a valorous young man who would have made a fine Christian and servant of God. But he is no longer on the road to baptism and salvation. I cried at that vision, and now the devil, in the shape of a woman, stands before me, testing my dedication to the true way. Begone! Off with you! Namphase fell to the ground weeping while begging for God's forgiveness. He vowed to find a new place to worship in isolation. He would leave that day and return northward in hopes of finding a more secluded area where no demon could ever reach him again. Bradamante stared at the hermit as she reluctantly put her armor back on. She was still sore from her wounds and would have preferred to rest longer, but it was unsafe in his company, for the hermit was clearly mad. She did not know which direction to turn and merely hoped she would find a way out of the ancient forest. Remounting Martesino's horse, she traveled until coming upon the banks of a river. There she allowed the horse and herself to drink freely. It had startled her to hear the hermit speak Ruggiero's name. The idea of Ruggiero converting to Christianity filled her heart with hope. Her meeting him the previous night must have influenced the hermit's visions. She did not worry about Ruggiero's soul being beyond salvation. God could not refuse entry to paradise to someone so honorable. She refused to consider his fate as being one of eternal damnation. They would meet again. Of that she was certain. She had almost asked Ruggiero to come away with her, but she was attacked before she had the chance. Had she not left his side, Perhaps he would be with her right now. She smiled at that thought. He would convert to Christianity out of love for her. They could not be married otherwise. She could never renounce her family, and her father would never accept her marrying outside their faith. Ruggiero's conversion was their only hope of a life together. She would also be heralded for recruiting a powerful knight for Christendom. Bradamante tied the horse to a tree on the riverbank and laid down to rest in the shade of a large oak. Removing her helmet, she closed her eyes and recalled Ruggiero's handsome face. It had reminded her of marble statues, flawless in their beauty. She imagined touching the curls of his dark hair and tracing the contours of his face, smiling as exhaustion once again overcame her. She fell into a deep sleep. If you enjoyed this presentation, I invite you to discover my novels, Quest of the Warrior Maiden and Fate of the Saracen Knight. They are available in both ebook and trade paperback. Signed copies are available from the wonderful independent bookstore Kazoo Books in Kalamazoo, Michigan. You can find them online at kazoobooks.com. You can also visit my website at www.lindacmccabe.com or at questofthewarriormaiden.com and join my mailing list. The music is Ruggiero by Gaspar Sanz and played by Giacomo Fiore.